is there a correlation between desk jobs and, burnout or not?
Yeah. So I think, there's the strict definition of burnout, which is more related to work, toxic stress in the work environment. So it can happen to someone in any profession, but you can also get burnout from caregiver stress. So someone who's looking after a loved one who has a chronic illness, or a parent with a disabled child, which is very intense. And you can also get burnout for neurodivergent people get burnout. So ASD burnout from just the needing to mask and assume or appear to be neurotypical all day, going to school,
What
going to
does
work.
ASD mean?
Autistic spectrum disorder.
Okay,
So
yeah.
people who are neurodiverse or neurodivergent, they can get burnout too, because when your brain is works differently when you are neurodiverse, or ASD, it's called medically. It's not a disease, but your brain works differently. So that means when people with ASD go to work or school, sometimes people don't know that they have a neurodiverse brain, and they have to appear to fit in like they're neurotypical. So that can also lead to burnout as well. When they get home, sometimes they just have meltdowns because the stress is so high during the day for them. It's called masking. So there's all different kinds of burnout. So you can get burnout no matter what your job is, no matter what kind of person you are, what age you are. But certainly the helping professions are known to have high rates of burnout. It is true. So I do see in my practice a lot of medics, nurses, allied health professionals, dentists, social workers, that sort of thing.
Wow. Okay. So there is certain industries
Yeah.
where it's prevalent, and I
Yeah.
guess even to bring it back up, like you're like a double board certified doctor. Like, how did you get into this? Because I do, like, certainly over the last decade, it's become. I've seen it so much more prevalent amongst friends and family and people who
Yeah.
deal with it. And what kind of led you into burnout and this resilience area?
Yeah. So I am an integrative medicine doctor. So what that means is I went to medical school in the normal fashion. Then I went into family medicine, did my specialty in family medicine in Canada. And then I went on to do another specialization in this thing called integrative medicine in the US. So what led me to doing that was I was really interested in both preventative medicine or upstream medicine. So helping people avoid getting really sick when they're kind of getting the first symptoms of not being well. So first stages of burnout. And then people who have already been sick and helping them to recover using something other than a drugs only based approach. So the reason I was interested in this is because I struggled with stress in medical school. I think genetically, I probably have a lower than average stress tolerance, which you can do all kinds of fancy genetic tests now to see where you are on that spectrum. And also, I just felt really disillusioned going through medical school, seeing all these patients with chronic illness who were just not getting better. So that is what really led me into, my specialty of integrative medicine. And I find the term burnout, it's really interesting because I get a lot of people, obviously in the clinic, people come to see me for medical problems, but some of them actually call it burnout. So when I assess them clinically, they might meet criteria for depression or an anxiety disorder or insomnia or chronic fatigue, using these different scales we use using clinical assessments, but to them, it feels like burnout. And that's really important because at the end of the day, it's really how the patient feels that matters. And sometimes that's missed out in modern medicine. So I do see a lot of burnout from all these different reasons because burnout affects the brain. So it can cause problems with mood, problems with energy levels. It affects the body. So it can leave you predisposed to a variety of chronic illnesses, as well as pain syndromes. So I see a lot of full body pain syndromes where a burnout or a stressful event has preceded the symptoms. So that's kind of like how I got started. And that's really what my passion is. This area of medicine is helping people with chronic symptoms recover their health.
Yeah. Like, do you like the term burnout? Like, is it because like we've got a good friend of ours
Yeah.
is a consultant gastroenterologist, and the word IBS, he really has a problem with it. He says it's
Yeah.
an umbrella term that masks the underlying issues and people kind of get attached to this kind of, I have IBS, but it really could be
Yeah.
a whole plethora of other different diseases or illnesses which are a lot easier to treat. What do you find about the term
Yeah.
burnout? Do you?
Well, I think, in medical terms, I'm not writing burnout as the main diagnosis when I'm seeing a patient. But I think it's a term that people identify with. And I think one of the reasons why is it seems a lot more socially acceptable to accept that you might have burnout than for some people, for example, to accept that they might have depression or an anxiety disorder. So I think from that perspective, if it gets patients saying, or people just saying, okay, I think something's out of balance, I need to do something, I think it's a good thing. But certainly, of course, in medicine, especially in integrated medicine, we want to look at root causes. So I completely agree with your friend who's the gastroenterologist. And he actually sounds like a really good gastroenterologist because, yeah, when I see patients who have come to me with the label of IBS, I'm doing stool testing, I'm doing functional medicine panels. Sometimes I'm working with a gastroenterologist to get them scoped. And we're seeing, looking at the brain-gut connection, the vagal nerve tone, which is how the automatic nervous system is working and affecting the gut. These are all things we're looking at rather than, as your friend rightly said, saying, oh, you just have IBS. So rather than saying, oh, you just have burnout, we obviously have to get to the potential causes of burnout, the precipitating factors, the contributing factors that are making the burnout continue. And then we treat those individually, getting to the root causes as much as we can, really.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And for like, what are typical first signs of burnout for someone who's kind of like, is it that you're finding it hard to relax and that you're kind of like for anyone listening who kind of goes, I'm on the path possibly, but I'm not sure. What do people need to look out for? What does one need to be aware of?
Yeah. I think one of the first signs, there's signs in different categories. So in the work category, a sign of burnout would be not feeling fulfilled in your job anymore, feeling more cynical than you used to. Specifically, healthcare workers with burnout, they have compassion fatigue, which means they're a really compassionate person, but they've just lost the ability to feel compassion at work because they're just so mentally numbed because of burnout. Wow. So those are some of the work signs. So you're not enjoying your work. You don't feel as passionate about it. You feel more cynical. You don't feel hopeful about the future for your career. So those are kind of career-based ones. Because I also work in the corporate world. I work with people in, corporate jobs and in finance as well. And for those people, they often identify with those as triggers from a work perspective. Then there's things from a life perspective that are triggers for, okay, there's something wrong. So one of them is when someone becomes fatigued versus just tired. So tired means that you haven't been getting enough sleep. So you might be, overdoing it, burning the candle at both ends. You might be just sleeping for 6 hours a night and you wake up and you feel tired because you haven't got that 8 hours or 7.5 hours or 9 hours, depending on the person, of that sleep. Fatigue, on the other hand, is defined as when you are getting that sleep, you are in your bed for those amount of hours and you still wake up feeling tired, feeling unrested. That's called what we call fatigue in medical speak. So if you tip over into fatigue, meaning you're getting those hours in bed and you're still waking up feeling tired, then that's a sign that your body is entering into this kind of burnout kind of phase. Other people start off with, and actually a lot of people start off with this hyperarousal phase, as you mentioned before, just feeling like some people say they feel jacked up. They feel wired but tired. And sometimes the wired comes before the tired. So sometimes people will feel like they have a nervous energy and they kind of crash into sleep at night. But during the day, they're on edge. They feel on edge. They feel anxious, but they still have energy because it's like a nervous energy. So feeling on edge, feeling wound up, having trouble relaxing, that can also be an initial sign.
Have you heard about the blue zones?
Yes.
Yeah. And Dan Buettner, the guy who was one of the kind of the spearheaded it, he often has the phrase that we live in an obesogenic environment. That it's, if you're overweight and you're ill healthy, it's very likely not your fault because the environment, the unhealthy choice is a lot easier than the healthy choice.
Yes.
And nowadays I look at our environment, I look at like we're 43, 44 next month. And I kind of go, in the last 20 years, like since social media and phones and Netflix and like, it's just life has become so much more always on. And has it been the last 20 years that it's massively skyrocketed because of email and text message and WhatsApp and Snapchat and Instagram stories and I need to have abs as well and I want to be a mother or a father and I got to buy a house and I need to go to Bali because someone just went to Bali and then I'm going to be happy and And I need a career, you know, and all these things. And I
Yeah.
just wonder, has it skyrocketed in the last 2 decades?
Oh, I think so, definitely. I just turned 40 a couple weeks ago, so I'm in the same cohort as you guys. So yeah, I think it is more challenging now to shut off than it ever was before. And of course, it's not all bad. Of course, social media comes with good things too, and access to the internet. Information is power for people with chronic illness. So there's good things too, but that inability to shut off easily is a huge, huge factor in burnout. So screen time has gone through the roof. And we can't avoid these screens completely. I mean, I work on a computer. I see people doing virtual medicine. I see people from all around the country, which is amazing that they can access me. But I sit on the computer all day. So, I think we have to do things to combat these things. For me, I turn my phone on airplane mode as soon as I finish work. That's a big one for me. And there's other things like doing mindfulness meditation. I try to fit in even 5 minutes at lunchtime. Getting out in nature, putting your feet, it sounds like very hippie woo-woo stuff, but literally just putting your feet on some grass if you can.
We interviewed the grounding guys, so I have a grounding sheet that I sleep on every night. So we're all into it. I wear grounding straps on my shoes. So yeah, we're into that one.
So I think in doing things to calm the nervous system, I go see an acupuncturist. I use a device that helps with vagal tone when I'm working on the computer. So I clip it on.
What is a vagal tone? Like, I know your vagus nerve.
Yeah, so that's what it is. So vagal tone is how well your vagus nerve is working. And for those people who might not know what that is, the vagus nerve is a really, really important part of your rest and digest and feeling safe mode of the nervous system, or the parasympathetic nervous system. So we know that low vagal tone is associated with a number of health problems, from anxiety and depression to brain diseases, essentially. And chronic low-grade stress can decrease our vagal tone. So there's really easy things you can do, like gargling, chanting, humming, singing, going for a walk, exercise. And then there's higher tech things you can do if you are sitting at a computer like I do for a lot of the hours of the day. So there's these devices you can use now at home, and they basically stimulate the auricular, or the ear branch of your vagal nerve. So I use a lot of these things myself, and I use them with my patients because you have to make things practical for people. Some people can't get out and go for a walk every single lunchtime. So these are some other strategies I think are helpful.
And does that when it sits in your ear, like, the way there's those cool earphones you can put, and they're vibration ones. Is it kind of like that, where there's vibration that's stimulating your vagal tone? Or
exactly, it's on the trigus of your ear, and which is where the auricular branch of this vagus nerve is, and it clips on, and it sends an electro pulse basically through that area. So it is really cool, yeah.
Wow.
There's some high-tech stuff you can
great.
do.
Well, anything that you can just sit there and it happens is is much more accessible for people to do. It means I don't have to get up at 6:30 and go for a run or jump in the cold sea or something. Like, it sounds.
And those things are great. Cold belt therapy these are all great things. But I have a lot of patients with chronic illness, so I have the desk workers who are pretty healthy, and they're kind of more my burnout patients. But then I have people who are really unwell, and they have a lot of chronic illnesses together. And for those people, they might be housebound or even bedbound when they first see me. So anything I can do for them that is easy for them to do for that initial phase of getting their resilience higher is really important.
Yeah. Black Friday sale, wonderful opportunity for anyone who loves instant air fryers. They are phenomenal. We love the Vortex VersaZone. They're offering up to 40% off. There is a link down in our show notes. Click that to avail of it. Just to even describe it, like, I love air fryers, and the instant Vortex VersaZone, it's like a beast. It's huge. It got so much capacity for you to control the temperature, the time. Just there's so much room to play with. It's not just an air fryer. It's like an air fryer on steroids.
Yeah, I know that sounds a little weird, but it really, really is. That's 40% off the instant Vortex VersaZone air fryer. It's the one that I use at home. I use it all the time. I've got 3 of them. I'm very greedy, but I do use them all the time. It's all I use. I don't use the oven.
You got a little garage for your air fryers?
I had to build an extra extension on the kitchen presses just to put in my air fryers. Genuinely, I'm not lying.
Know. So they're like little mini cars.
Anyway, we're gone off topic here. 40% off. Check it out. Link in the show notes.
On the topic of chronic illness, my understanding of chronic illness is an illness that lasts a long period of time, and throughout
Yeah.
that process, almost like mental health deteriorates, physical health almost compounds, deteriorates too, and you're in this negative cycle. And it's how do you approach that? Because it's not just a physical symptom anymore. I imagine prolonged illness results in mental health deterioration also. So you're having to hit it from every factor.
Very holistic. You have to fit it from an integrative and an upstream approach.
Oh, very good, David Flynn. You're saying all the right things.
No, that's exactly right. So I specialize in complex chronic illness treatment. So I always tell my patients that I get patients that have been put into what I call the too hard bucket by a lot of other doctors. And people get put into the too hard bucket because they have usually overlapping symptoms. They might have been diagnosed with depression or anxiety or a sleep problem. Plus they have chronic pain. They might have some kind of immune system problem, digestion problems. And all of these symptoms, as you rightly said, start to compound each other and lead to this cycle of feeling worse and less resilient over time. So picking it all apart is complicated, but it's possible and people can get better. So my approach with them when I see those patients, number one, is we usually, I do an integrative assessment and we figure out together where's the most bang for buck initially. So I might use something like a cannabis-based medicine to help calm their nervous system, to get them sleeping better, to calm down their pain pathways or their anxiety. And that is something that's easy for someone to take, quote unquote, take. So sometimes I start with things that you can take or do easily, like the vagal nerve device. And then we start with things that you do once they're feeling better. So, even before I do fancy functional medicine testing, like for the gut-brain axis, for hormones, the results of those tests lead to having to do changes in the lifestyle, like changes in the diet, taking a lot of supplements, a lot of times for short periods of time. Those things are harder to do when someone's resilience is very low. So we usually start with therapies that kind of bump them up 1 or 2 levels, and then we tackle the next bucket. Because oftentimes what's happened is patients have received so much advice all at once about all these different things that they need to do, and it's so overwhelming for them that they're not able to stick with it. And that makes them feel worse and hurts their self-esteem even more, that they can't get better. So that's usually what we do with someone who has a lot of complex chronic illness going on.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's starting really slow, because if your nervous system is in firing off and everything is triggering you and you're hypersensitive to any kind of criticism or negativity, and you're exhausted, like it's anything that you need to be kind of held nearly and spooned for, until you feel safe again, and then slowly recover until you start to feel more yourself, I'd imagine.
Yeah, exactly that. And, we know that the brain and the gut and the immune system, they all talk to each other. So when people have chronic pain, for example, the pain is not just in the limb or the hand or the shoulder anymore. It's in the brain. It affects the gut. It affects the nervous system. It affects the immune system. So we really have to look at this, like you said, in a very holistic fashion if we're going to get people well for the long term.
Wow, yeah, it's incredible work. And autoimmune disease, are they kind of triggered by autoimmune disease, or autoimmune disease are typically part of the bundle?
It can be, it depends on the patient. So, autoimmune disease definitely have a genetic predisposition. So someone who has a very strong family history of lots of autoimmune diseases, we're going to be more prone to them. And often, if I would say almost always, there's always an exception in medicine, what you learn the more you practice. But usually there's some kind of stress event or an infection or an emotional stressor, or them pushing themselves too hard. Like typical is the lawyer who pushes himself really hard, running the marathon, should have maybe pulled out of the marathon because they got a little bit sick and they were really working hard at work, but just pushed on. And then they end up with an autoimmune condition that starts up after. Sometimes if we push the body so hard, or if the body has an acute stressor, then something can go wrong in the immune system, especially if we're predisposed genetically, and that can trigger the onset of an autoimmune condition.
Wow. So it seems like there's that kind of balance. It's a bit like life in general. Once you cross over a point, like stress, like what I understand is a certain amount of stress is very healthy. We need stress to help us to grow, to build resilience. Our muscles get bigger when we stress them. When we're challenged, we grow, like growth comes out of it. So stress is an important part of life. But when you cross over a certain point, then it becomes negative and it starts to negatively impact you.
That's right. It's something called the JKs Dodson Law. So basically, this is a really fancy way of saying, and they've known about this for over
the
JKs Dodson Law. Yeah.
Wow, what a name.
So, the interesting thing is JKs and Dodson were two scientists that invented this stress response curve. They discovered it over 100 years ago. So we've known about this for a really long time, but it's still not really, I don't feel, well integrated, this concept, into Western medicine. So what this law says is basically exactly like you described. You have a certain amount of stress that is healthy because it challenges the body in a healthy way. But once you tip over into too much stress, it becomes negative. And the tipping point is when the stress becomes overwhelming for the body and the brain. And that is different for each of us. So, I always tell patients, it is unfair because you will know people who can, sleep for 6 hours, eat unhealthily, drink alcohol more than you should, and they never get sick. They're good. We all know these people. There's not a lot of them, but they do exist. And then I have some patients who, have to sleep 9 hours a night. They can't drink alcohol. They have to be very, very healthy to just feel, quote unquote, normal. So everyone's stress tolerance is different. But the good thing is you can shift your stress tolerance as well. You can shift it. So it depends on the biological factors that you have that are contributing to your stress tolerance. Is there environmental toxin exposures that you can reduce? If there's a variety of things we can do. Is your vagal tone low, like we talked about earlier? So there's ways we can shift this curve, but starting where your current curve is important.
Wow. Yeah. Like one thing I was doing some research for this podcast, and one of the keys to resilience, you spoke about some softer things like compassion, gratitude, flexibility. And that doesn't mean like being able to touch your toes, but the ability to adapt to your environment as opposed to be rigid and stuck and I have to do that now.
Yes, exactly. And, if you talk to people who live to 100, these are some themes that come up. They usually are quite grateful for what they have, even if they don't have a lot. They're usually quite flexible, thinking. And these things are good for our brain, you see, because these decrease stress in the brain. When we're able to be flexible, the brain feels less stress and less bad stress, less negative stress. And these are traits that we can all cultivate. So some people are naturally more flexible. It's just the way it is. Some people are naturally, it's easier for them to practice gratitude and compassion meditations. But everyone can learn how to do these. These are brain skills anyone can learn. That's the good news.
Yeah, how does one work on being more adaptable or being more flexible in that way in terms of their day-to-day life? Because some people naturally are, they find it easier to be in flow, or they seem like they're in flow. And some people,
or even I was going to say, like, we have a business, and when you've got different members of the team, you need different skill sets. And I know we're quite chaotic. Like when chaos prevails, that's when we kind of come to life. Like, oh yes, right. This whereas other people in our team are just so risk averse and so, which you absolutely need to balance it, and they really don't want chaos at all. So it's different people are, I think, almost by nature have a different stress tolerance.
Absolutely. So I think the first part is just, accepting that, diversity is amazing and everyone is, does have their own set point for these things. You can practice being more flexible in little ways, if someone's 5 minutes late, trying to just have a few deep breaths and, just instead of thinking, oh, I can't believe they're late again. Think,
I'm going to bite their head off when they arrive.
Exactly. Yeah. Just like, you know what, it's okay. I don't have to account for every moment. And, there's all kinds of little compassion practices you can do, self-compassion practices. I feel that sometimes flexibility starts with self-compassion in a lot of senses, because if we're more compassionate to ourselves, it's easier to give other people some slack. So there's really simple compassion meditations you can do. There's loads online. UCLA has a lot of great, they have an app now. Their UCLA mindfulness app is fantastic. So sometimes I tell patients, just put on a recording and just listen to one of these meditations a few minutes a day. And just a little bit every day can make a difference.
Well, I certainly know in my experience of having children that's been the greatest greatest catalyst to becoming more flexible, because
Definitely.
you can be very focused. Certainly I look at myself in my late 20s and before having kids at 30. I'm very whatever, and then having kids, it just, whether you want to or not, you just have to become very flexible, because your children's needs typically become ahead of yours.
Exactly.
When they're little anyway.
It's so true.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, I absolutely find the same thing. And you just have to let things go, and you have to learn how to pick your battles. And it's a beautiful journey. I feel exactly the same since I've become a mom. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good to agree with that. How do people measure their stress tolerance, or is it worth measuring your stress tolerance and having an understanding? Does that help with someone's awareness and their propensity towards burnout or resilience?
Yeah. So there's different ways to measure different aspects of stress. It depends how you define it, of course. But you can measure things like heart rate variability. That's a way to measure kind of indirectly to measure vagal tone. You can do things like genetic tests to see what genes you carry. There's functional medicine testing that can look at cortisol rhythms, the stress hormone in your blood and your saliva, and how that changes over a 24-hour period. So there's certain patterns when I do someone's cortisol testing. If they're not peaking the cortisol the right time of day, for example, or they don't have a nice uptick after they get up, a nice little burst, then we know the stress tolerance is lower than it maybe it could be. So these tests can be helpful if you're treating someone, because you understand where they're at right now. The genetic side of the test can also be helpful for helping people remove the guilt and shame around, why can't I just sleep 6 hours like my other colleagues? Why do I need more rest? Why am I more sensitive to stress? Because a lot of people feel a lot of guilt around these things. I know myself, I need 9 hours of sleep a night. I definitely have to work harder than average. I don't drink any alcohol. I live a very healthy lifestyle, and I have to really manage my stress. And when I do that, I generally feel good. But I do a lot of things in order to do that. So I'm probably on that lower end genetically, that spectrum. And I've just
Yeah, I like that. That really does kind of lean into the diversity, and that some are you designed for different functions in society by their very makeup.
Yeah, I'd love to lean into the sleep aspect, because it sounds like sleep is really probably one of the absolute pillars which predicate people's well-being in general, but certainly in terms of burnout or chronic fatigue or one's resilience. Sleep is the cornerstone, because if you get poor sleep, your immune system's going to be weaker, your emotional health's going to be weaker, you're less likely to move, your relationships, it all kind of stems from that. Almost seems like the foundation, sleep. Is that what you find in your,
Yeah, it really is. Oftentimes, if you can get someone sleeping better, it just changes their life. A lot of times I get people who have tried a lot of different things for their sleep. They've tried the CBT insomnia programs. They've tried the sleep hygiene. They've tried botanicals. They have tried sleeping pills. Sometimes they do really well with cannabis-based medicines, a tiny amount. I prescribe cannabis as a medicine in medical form. So it's a THC oil, for example, sometimes we do give for sleep. In cases where they've tried lots of other things, and oftentimes it works extremely well, because it sometimes lets them get deeper sleep. Ideally, of course, we wouldn't take anything for our sleep. We would just not. A different kind of pulse than the other vagal nerve stimulator device. And it puts your brain into a relaxed alpha brainwave state. And so I use that. I do use botanicals.
Is that
use
before
obviously
sleep?
hygiene.
Is CES before sleep, or is it like before bedtime?
So not usually. So interestingly, you use it for the first 30 days. You're supposed to use it twice a day, 30 minutes at a time, twice a day, but not before sleep. Because if you use it right before sleep, inducing that alpha wave state can kind of disrupt the deeper sleep cycles. So you actually have to use it 3 hours away from sleep, generally
Wow.
speaking.
Wow. That's fair. I've never heard of that. We've interviewed a few sleep experts, and no one's ever mentioned you've got different tricks. Wow, cool.
Well, you know, and we don't always start with that because these devices cost money, of course. They're not crazy expensive, but it's some money. So we start with simple things. But a lot of the patients I see are the difficult cases. I mean, if they responded well to sleep hygiene, they wouldn't be coming to see me.
Yeah, of course.
So we have to get sometimes we have to get quite fancy, and we can usually improve things. Is the good news.
That's amazing. Yeah, because there is a lot of information out there about sleep and people's sleep habits, and I need 9 hours and blackout blinds and a good rhythm that I get up at the same time every day. And, I get up and I see the morning sun and I move to get my adrenaline. I don't look at screens 2 hours before, and I don't eat food 3 hours before, and I don't drink alcohol, and I stop drinking coffee before 10 a.m.
I fill a worry journal and
I do, but I can get to sleep okay, but then I wake up twice during the night and my brain keeps going. And what do you say to those people?
Those are the people that we do the cannabis, the devices. We do functional medicine testing usually, and we look at other causes, neurotransmitters and vitamin insufficiency, like all these kinds of things. Ruling out sleep apnea, that's another one that often gets missed. Because that's exactly right. A lot of the patients I see, they have done exactly that, and they're still having trouble sleeping. So for them, it's really frustrating because they keep going back to their GP, and their GP just meaningly says, have you tried some CBT? And they just want to tear their hair out when they hear that, because they have tried. It hasn't been effective for them so far.
Is that CBT, like cognitive behavior therapy?
Yes, which can be very helpful, but for some people it's not enough. And there's something called CBTI, which is CBT for insomnia. So that is often a first step that is done for people in the medical system when they have insomnia, and it includes exactly the things that you just described. So the blackout blinds, the sleep environment, the shutting off screens, the worry journal, all of those things. So they're all still important, but sometimes it's not enough.
Totally.
And do you find in terms of sleep that there's a difference between men and women, or whatever people are identifying in terms of their gender? Do you find there is a difference between people
hormonal cycles?
Due to hormonal cycles in terms of people's sleep?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of times when women start to approach perimenopause, their sleep changes. And that's the first time that they will notice a problem. Sometimes they've always been what they would maybe say a light sleeper or not a great sleeper, but they've just been okay. And then when the hormones start to change, the hormone levels start to change in early perimenopause, then the sleep becomes more disrupted, and it's a big issue. So you have to include hormones when you think about sleep, definitely.
Wow. If we're to move into the topic of resilience, I think we've gone burnout, we looked at different things. For resilience, because I think resilience ultimately is our ability to deal with stress, isn't it? And to cope with it, to go from stressful state back to kind of, parasympathetic state. What are kind of fundamentals to resilience? Like, I think we mentioned some of the softer ones, which is, flexibility, gratitude, which one doesn't necessarily think in terms of. But then when I think about it spiritually, to be grateful is to be fully present and to kind of to accept what you have around you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think there's so much for me as a doctor. I look at resilience in terms of biological resilience, psychological resilience, immune resilience. So there's different aspects to all these things. So I think some of the simple things you can do is, number one, eat real food. Avoid ultra-processed food as much as you can. Don't beat yourself up when you have a treat, because that's not great either. But, just try to eat real food. Try whenever you can. And this is not always possible to cook from scratch. I get it. I don't cook from scratch every night. But I do subscribe to some of these organic meal services that have all real foods, all whole foods. You just put them in the oven. So, there's ways to cheat this. But eating real food, that's a big one.
So
try to eat organic.
From farms rather than factories.
Yeah, exactly. And I get my food from a supermarket for the most part, but I try to buy organic whenever I can, try to buy local whenever I can. Even going out when it's the summer here, we pick apples, we pick plums, we pick berries, we do things with them. We freeze things, we grow vegetables, not a lot of vegetables, but we grow beans, we grow courgettes, just little things, and just a backyard garden. So it helps you to eat real food when you have it kind of close by. I think the second thing is, and this is a really tough one for people, is alcohol intake, because alcohol is universally a resilient killer.
Wow.
And I say that, people are going to be rolling their eyes, I know, because it's such a ubiquitous part of our culture, especially in the UK. Because I think in Ireland as well, it's a big part of
hugely, yeah.
culture. And it's problematic for a lot of people because it's not good for it depresses the immune system. It can it leaves the brain in a more anxious, depressed state after the initial boost. It actually impairs different phases of sleep. So, we really have to be careful with alcohol. And I think a lot of people do overuse it, and it's so socially normalized. So sometimes, especially patients are on a budget, I start with just eating real food, and I say just take an alcohol holiday. And we start with 4 weeks, and then sometimes we extend it to 8 weeks. And a lot of times they just feel so much better.
Wow.
There's some cool new things coming out on the market. There's a spirit now by one of my colleagues at Imperial College, Professor David Nutt. He's come out with this alcohol-free spirit that does make you feel a bit buzzy. And so a lot of times I tell my patients, take a bottle of that with you to a dinner party. It's a good conversation starter anyways, and just top your drink up with that instead. And once they get used to it, they say, you know what, I didn't really miss the alcohol actually, and I didn't have a hangover. So it's harder when you're out, when you're at a restaurant or you're at a pub. That's when it gets trickier. But the real food, the alcohol, and spending time in nature, doing something to relax your nervous system. That is another really big thing. We really, even myself, having a baby, I work full time. I don't live in central London anymore. For me, a big part of resilience was going to my dance class every week, but it's in central London. And I haven't been back. I'm actually starting to go back now. I took about 6 months away because life just got
what
really
type of
busy.
dancing?
Contemporary dance. I'm very
Nice.
bad. This is going to make it sound like I'm some great dancer. I'm not, I promise.
But it sounds so cool to prioritizing dance. Like, that sounds brilliant. Your inner child must be delighted.
Yeah, I have a wonderful teacher. He's been teaching dance for about, gosh, I would say almost 50 years.
Wow.
And he's still dancing. He's still in the best shape of, it's amazing. So I find, when I get to his class once a week, even though it takes me almost an hour and a half traveling on the train each way to get there, but I've decided recently I have to start going again because for me, it brings so much joy to my week that, but it's sometimes these things that feel very frivolous. And when you're a mom, you have the mom guilt and you're busy and you're tired. But at the end of the day, sometimes these things that seem frivolous are actually really good for our spirit. And that's actually really important for resilience too.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I like the idea of things that kind of inflate our spirit. There's a huge healing power of that. And even like the idea of going out with friends and maybe having a couple of drinks, even though alcohol as a rule typically can be quite anti-resilient, but the laughter, the joy, the friendship, the connectivity can outweigh.
But that could be just a walk in the morning, or it could be a coffee in the morning. There's a million ways to do it.
Yeah.
But I think what you're hitting on there is the relationships and the therapeutic effect of having friends that you feel accepted and belong to, and you feel you can be yourself. Like, I think that's probably what you're saying.
Well said.
But it's true. I think when people have to stop drinking, especially in this culture, they do feel quite isolated. So it is that balance, isn't it? How do you go out and enjoy a drink with friends? Maybe it's just having one, maybe just having an alcohol-free spirit, and just making it very casual about it. Because you're right, the connection you get from those moments is very healing as well.
Yeah. We run an alcohol-free challenge every January, so it's always amazing to see. We gave it back 20 years ago, not because we meant it, but it was just happened, and we didn't really think about it. But when you see, the challenge of going through it, the social...
and it's kind of just changing your whole social cycle. Instead of meeting friends to go out in the evening, maybe it's going out at sunrise and going for a walk, or exercising, or going to dance class. It's just socializing differently.
Yeah, you're right. You have to completely rework your social life when you don't drink alcohol. My husband and I both don't drink alcohol now, and we become more daytime people now. With kids, it's easy actually. So
night time's for sleeping. 9 p.m. I gotta go to bed.
Exactly. Yeah, time to go to bed.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. We find most of our friends they don't drink alcohol. It just happens. You tend to gravitate to people that get up early and, go to bed early, or prioritize sleep, or whatever way. That's kind of what happened in our circles anyway. There was one more thing I was thinking of. There was I've heard you talk about polymyalgia. Our mom has fibromyalgia, isn't it? Oh, it's poly. She's poly. Oh, I've heard you talking about fibromyalgia. Polymyalgia, is that like another burnout, is that another?
So polymyalgia rheumatica is a condition where it's actually an autoimmune condition, and it's really common as people get older. So we usually see it in people who are 50 years or older, although it's possible to see younger, but very rare. And it can be very debilitating, as you probably know. So the acute treatment is we usually give people steroids.
Yep. She knows about
She
that.
loves them.
They make life better at the moment.
They do in the moment. So you have to do that. I mean, I'm not anti-medicine. I'm a medical doctor. So, it's good to do that in the short term because you have to calm down the inflammation. But in the longer term, a lot of the functional medicine, the integrative medicine pieces can often come into play. So looking at things like anti-inflammatories, I use cannabis sometimes, which is an anti-inflammatory in the form of oils by prescription, of course. CBD, which you can get over the counter, is something people can trial, but it's not usually quite as effective, but at high doses can help some people. Other things like liposomal curcumin, other anti-inflammatory herbals. Looking at from a functional medicine perspective, we look at the gut. There's all kinds of things we do to see, okay, is there something else we can shift that will hopefully indirectly impact the immune system in the right direction. So it's not a quick fix with integrative medicine. Unfortunately, integrative medicine is kind of slow medicine. But a lot of times there is a kind of a lever of control that you can find to kind of reduce the recurrence of PMR.
Wow.
Yeah.
PMR, that's what's called polymyalgia.
Something.
Rheumatica.
Rheumatica. There we are.
PMR, that's way easier to say. Sounds a bit like PMA though.
Yeah. Definitely.
Geez, you're brilliant. This is fascinating. It really, really is.
I love your gentle approach. You're very articulate. And
I love the upstream approach. Like, it's not easy, but it's really the principles that underpin health. And whether you're dealing with burnout or autoimmune disease, like it's harder to go upstream. Like, most people just, give me a pill and make me better. But it's kind of looking at the underpinning issues and how can you get a better foundation with which to live a healthier life.
Yeah, exactly. There's not really any instant fixes to these problems because these problems take years to develop in the body and the brain. So we have to remember that. We have to remember they do take time to remediate.
Wow. So for anyone who's listening and kind of goes, okay, I feel like I've got, or someone in my family, if it's not themselves, they kind of go, oh, my partner, my friend, they're definitely they're not the same person that they've been. What would you say to that person?
Well, I think the first thing is, reaching out to family and friends and just getting your social network mobilized. And of course, going to see your doctor, going to see your family doctor is always the first protocol. Just to rule out, of course, anything serious that could be underlying, because symptoms of fatigue, and it's so nonspecific that in the beginning, we often have to start by ruling out serious things. But after those things have been ruled out, usually this is when people come to see me. Nothing terrible is going on as far as they don't have cancer. There's nothing, there's no serious exact causes. And that's when seeing an integrative medicine doctor or an integrative nutritionist can be really helpful.
Wow.
Yeah, I like that. That's nice.
Very good. And you said typically underneath there's often some catalyst, some external catalyst, like it could be a death or losing a job or something. There's typically some external.
Or viral illness or something. Yeah.
That's at the root before the chronic fatigue or some of these other symptoms might come.
Yeah, it's usually either an emotional trigger, a physical trigger, or an immune system trigger. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 of those at the same time. Whether, I've seen people who had undiagnosed Lyme disease, they had a tick bite that they didn't really even know about. And that was actually the cause of their fatigue. They had chronic Lyme. I've seen people where they had COVID. Of course, I treat a lot of long COVID patients, so that they usually come to see me after they've been sick for at least a year. So they've usually had COVID. They might have gotten better, but not all the way, or they just never got better. So oftentimes those viral triggers can play a role. And then some types of viruses, like the Epstein-Barr virus, like COVID, now we know for sure, it's now been proven in a big study recently, they can hide in the gut in some people. So they can hide in what's called their biofilm. So when the immune system gets lower, these viruses become active again. So sometimes, it's complicated. We have to look at all of these factors. So that's why it takes time to tease them apart. And that's why people get put into the too hard bucket. But there are things that we can do to tease them apart. And usually we do get there in the end.
You kind of almost have to be like a detective, like a world-class detective of of putting in multiple tests and then trying to somehow put on your, you know, your detective hat and kind of go, well, where's the correlation? Where does the Venn diagram, where do these things overlap? And, you know.
That's right. Yeah, it is detective work. I think that's why I enjoy it so much, because it is exactly that. You're working with the patient as a partner to, you know, be a detective and find out the best path for them.
And is there a typical time frame for people to recover from a general burnout? Is it months? Is it years? Is it weeks?
It depends. If it's very mild, it could be weeks. If it's moderate and there's, you know, immune dysfunction and other things going on, it's usually months. And if people are bedbound with chronic fatigue for a year or more, or long COVID, I've had patients who have been bedbound by the time they get to see me for a year with chronic fatigue syndrome. We're taking probably 2 years to get them better. And sometimes it's slow and it's really painful progress, because they can get better and then they can have a setback. But we do tend to get there in the end. That's the good news.
That really does give
very
hope.
Encouraging.
Amazing. Well done, Dani. Your work's incredible.
Yeah.
And your recent book is The Resilient Blueprint, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't
learn
read
your
it.
type. Learn your types of your type of resilience. Which type of resilient person you are, not which type of warrior you are.
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, really, really good. It's been such an honor to talk to you. You're brilliant. A font of knowledge.
Thank you. It's been so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks, Mel. Yeah. If you ever come on holidays, we're in Ireland. We have a cool little farm and a cool little world of.
Oh, we'd love to come. Where are you guys located?
Literally just out to Dublin. We have a cool. Oh, I'll send you. I'll get your email and I'll send you everything about it. Like, it's cool, and we can find you somewhere to stay. It's really cool. Like, it's one of the most livable community in the world, under 20,000 people. It's right by the sea, and there's nice saunas. And there's, we have a 4-acre
regenerative farm and
a food business. You know, it's all based around whole plant foods. So we've been at it for 20 years.
I think we'll probably just want to move there.
Right. It's nice. It is. It's a really nice part of the world.
Oh, it's really lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah. Well, thanks a million for today.
Bye.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.